Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today, uh, it's my honor to introduce Professor Hailiang Wang to join our CIC webinar series. So first, please let me briefly introduce Professor Hailiang Wang. He earned his bachelor degree in chemistry and a double major in economics from Peking University in 2007. And then he moved to US and obtained his PhD degree in chemistry from Stanford University in 2012 under the direction of Professor Hongjie Dai. After 2 years of postdoctoral fellowship at UC Berkeley, Professor Hailiang Wang started his independent career at Yale University in 2014, where he is currently an associate professor of chemistry. His research interest is to employ chemistry, material science, and nanotechnology and surface science to tackle the challenges in electrochemical energy storage and conversion. The vision is to understand material structures and properties at solid-liquid interfaces under electrochemical conditions and to establish design principles for new and improved electrocatalysis and battery materials. And Professor Hailiang Wang has published more than 100 co-author papers and with a high H-index of 65. In recognition of his great work, Professor Hailiang Wang has received many prestigious awards. Just to name a few, he has won the ACE's Young Investigator Award in Division of Inorganic Chemistry in 2012, IUPAC Prize for Young Chemists in 2013, an NSF Career Award in 2017, and Sloan Research Fellowship in 2019. So with that, let's welcome Professor Hailiang Wang to give us a talk.
All right. Thank you so much for the introduction and, of course, the invitation. I mean, this is a very, I should say, a special moment for you, for me, because you know, many of you here in this center are my friends, and the rest are friends' friends, right? So this is a very special, opportunity for me to be here and then give a talk. And then given the nature of the center, I think it's still, I guess, the best for me to give a talk on this, molecular catalysis for carbon dioxide conversion, etc. Right? But the issue, as many of you know, is I have been giving talks on this topic for almost a year now. So there will be at least some part that it will repeat, the stuff that I talked about actually here at UCLA. I guess in September last year. So I tried to make some changes to the slides and then to include some of our newest work, so that at least part of the talk will be different from what it was, and also I guess I will go a little bit quickly on some of the parts that are very familiar to all of you. And I know that you want this talk to be interactive, right? So feel free to interrupt me at any time, and then I would be very happy to take questions, or to discuss even in the middle of the talk. Okay, so I'll just be pretty quick on this, right? So we want to switch to renewable energy sources, and then we can use electrochemical reactions to do energy storage, because renewable sources are intermittent, right? And then meanwhile, if we can make use of these renewable sources and to convert some of these chemical species of environmental concern, right, to use for chemicals. And then this involves carbon chemistry, this involves nitrogen chemistry, right? So these would be desirable approaches for the sake of sustainability. So this is just an example, and I will also be quick on this to simply illustrate that electrochemical reactions are efficient, right, in terms of storing energy. Right? So if we consider this simple reaction from H2 and O2 to water, and if we do it in a, say, combustion way, right, so that is reactions taking place in internal combustion engine, right? So the volume work that can be done, right, in this process, the maximum amount is limited by Carnot's efficiency, right? And then multiplied by the enthalpy change of this reaction, right? If this reaction is taking place under constant pressure conditions, and then if we think about this Carnot's efficiency, right? I mean, in optimistic conditions, it's 50%, right? I mean, this and the delta H is about 290 kilojoule per mole. That's so 150 kilojoule per mole is what you are getting for the volume work. And if you think about doing this reaction electrochemically, say in a fuel cell, right? Then the maximum work that can be done is the change of Gibbs free energy of the reaction, right? That can be 240 kilojoule per mole. So electrochemical reactions are thermodynamically good in terms of storing and then converting energy, right? But what you need to do is to make sure that the kinetics also goes well, right? And that includes selectivity, activity, stability, things like that, right? So that's what we typically work on, right? So going back to this carbon dioxide conversion reaction, right? So this is a electrolyzer and the CO2 reduction takes place here on the cathode, right? And we all know that the CO2 can be converted to multiple products, right? So one of the issues is you wanted to control the reaction pathway, so you get the product you want, right? Then you also want to do it at lower overpotential with high selectivity at high reaction rates, right? So that's related to the activity of the catalyst, right? So, and then two types of catalyst, right? You can use homogeneous catalyst, and these are typically molecules, right? I mean, they have well-defined structures, right? And then you can correlate the catalytic properties to the molecular structure of the active site, right? Then on the other hand, you have this heterogeneous catalyst, right? I mean, they are more convenient to use, right? I mean, and then they can deliver much higher current, right? And this is what is needed for electrochemical devices like the fuel cells and then electrolyzers, right? So this is the form that is used in real devices, right? But the issue with this category is, on the surface of nanoparticles, you have many different sites, and then oftentimes it's hard to correlate the catalytic properties to the structure of the site, right? So we were thinking whether we could combine the advantage of these two, right, to get a heterogeneous molecular catalyst. It can be compatible with devices, but it also enables mechanism-based optimization, right? So speaking of this CO2 electron reduction catalyzed by molecules, right? So some of the challenges that we have identified, right? So most of the studies are done in homogeneous conditions where the catalyst molecules are dissolved in the solution, right? And then if you want to support these molecules onto the surface of electrodes, oftentimes it's harder to realize, very high activity and then selectivity. And most of these catalysts that have been developed so far, right? They reduce carbon dioxide by 2 electrons. So carbon monoxide is a very common product. Formic acid or formate is another product, right? It's quite difficult to get further reduction beyond the 2 electrons. In some cases, like here, right? I mean, products like methane is observed, but they are all very minor in terms of selectivity, or typically below 1%. Right? Then it's often quite difficult to sort of bring other elements into this reaction. For example, to do carbon nitrogen coupling at the same time of CO2 reduction, right, to generate organoid nitrogen compounds, right? Like alkylamines. So these are the things that we have provided some information to in the past couple of years of research in our group. Right? So we were thinking of supporting molecules onto surfaces for electrochemical CO2 reduction. We, as far as this reaction is concerned, right, we want a high surface area, we want a good electrical conductivity, right? So we thought that the carbon nanotubes are good supports, right, for these molecules, right? And then this opinion is also shared by other people in this field. For example, Tom Myers group at the UNC, right? They anchor this molecule onto carbon nanotubes and then catalyze the catalyze the CO2 reduction reaction. Then for the cobalt thiocyanate molecules that we work on, right? I'm in collaboration with my friend, Professor Hailiang's group at Southern University of Science and Technology in China, right? I mean, these are relatively easy to be supported onto carbon nanotubes. We can just make use of pi interactions, and then they will be dispersed onto the surface reasonably well. And there's no need to modify the structure, like in this case. And then, supported on the carbon nanotubes, these molecules can catalyze CO2 reduction pretty well. Right? I mean, it does not really change the catalytic, the intrinsic catalytic property, right? I mean, COPC, by itself, right, can catalyze CO2 reduction to CO. The selectivity was reasonably good. Right? Once we support those molecules onto carbon nanotubes, we just get a larger number of active sites, and we get a better electron transport in this case. So the product is still CO, but the reaction rate now is 50 times higher, right? And then it can be pretty stable, say over at least 10 hours. And then we get a turnover number. Right? So this turnover number is estimated basically by assuming all the loaded molecules are active sites on the electrode, right? So this is likely an underestimate of a turnover number, but this is a safe value to report in this case, right? Then, the nice thing about this is this catalyst is the active site is molecular in nature, right? So we kind of know what is going on in this reaction, right? Based on what has been reported in the literature. So you started with a cobalt 2 plus, you get reduced to cobalt 1 plus, then electron transfer to CO2, and then it goes through the steps to get it to CO. So what is actually reacting with the CO2 or the real active site is this reduced cobalt species, right? So if we can sort of like make this reduced species appear at a lower over potential or more positive electrical potential, we can improve the activity of this catalyst, right? So that's what we did by changing the molecular structure. So we put on these electron withdrawing cyanide groups, and then they make this cobalt redox. Well, I guess it's never precise that it is a redox of cobalt, right? But somehow they make the redox of this molecule, to move to more positive electrical potentials, and that lowers over potential for the reaction. As you can see now, at the lower over potential in this region, we are getting better selectivity for the reaction. And, we get it to a reasonably good catalyst, right? So with the 0.5 volt over potential, we get reasonably high current density, and I should say this current density is limited by diffusion control, right? So if we move from this H cell to a flow cell with a gas diffusion electrode, then this current can be improved by at least 1 order of magnitude. Right? And the selectivity is high, the turnover frequency is high, so sort of like it has the and then we have demonstrated a bit of this mechanism-based optimization. Right? So this catalyst is sort of like has the advantages of both molecular systems and heterogeneous systems. Right? So moving forward, right? So we know that CO is often the major product, and it's very hard to sort of like make a further reduction beyond that, but it's really desirable to go there. So we were thinking that the interaction of CO with the catalytic site is the key to decide whether the CO can be further reduced, right? So this is basically some consideration from Sabatti's principle, right? If the interaction with CO is weak, right, then the absorption energy of CO is relatively small, so it's easy for CO to dissolve, right? And then in this case, the CO will basically be a product. And this is the case for metals like gold or silver, right? They pretty much reduce CO2 to CO with very high selectivity. Then if the interaction with CO is very strong, right, then it requires a very large overpotential for the CO to be, of course, dissolved, but it also requires very large overpotential. It requires large energy for the CO to dissolve, but it also requires a very large overpotential for the CO to be further reduced, right? So in that case, when you apply a large overpotential, right, you can reduce some CO, but the competing reaction, in this case, the HER reaction, the hydrogen revolution reaction, HER is going to be dominant, and you get lots of H2. So this is the case for platinum and nickel. They often give a little bit of methane, but HER is dominant, as we all know. So for if we want to get a catalyst that can, reliably reduce CO, right, you need a interaction, or I guess a binding energy for CO to be sort of like at the medium level, right? I mean, this is actually the case for copper, right? So copper is well known that it can reduce CO, right? So, and then if we examine these calculation results for those metal nitrogen complexes, right? It's interesting to see that depending on the identity of the metal, actually the binding energy for CO spreads quite a big range, right? And then these ones, right? I mean, with cobalt center, the binding energy for CO is pretty much at the same level as copper. So these are actually promising, right, in terms of the binding energy, and there's a possibility that these molecules, they can actually reduce CO, right? And then the reason that it's not observed in most of the reaction studies, we think is because these reactions are mostly taking place in homogeneous conditions, right? I mean, in that case, the catalyst molecule is dissolved in the solution. Then it needs to go to the electrode surface to get 1 or 2 electrons to be reduced, right? Then it diffuse back into the solution and then transfer the electron to the CO2 to reduce it, right? So this is basically electrochemical process coupled by a followed by a chemical process, right? So in that one cycle, you basically get a 1 electron transfer, and in order to say do a 6 or 8 electron reduction of CO2, this cycle needs to take place multiple times, and this is not desirable. And once CO is formed, they basically will just go and give it as a product, right? So in order for this process to continue, we think it's desirable that if the catalyst is actually sitting on the electrode surface or anchored on the electrode surface, then the electrons, the CO2 can come in, and then electrons can be continuously delivered to the active site or to the reactant from the electrode and from the external circuit, right? Then if we look at the literature, right, it is actually the case, right? So there was a paper published in 1984 by 2 chemists from Rice University, right? And what they did was they basically put this, cobalt tyrosine onto the surface of a gaseous carbon electrode, and that the electrode was able to produce some methanol, right, in CO2 reduction. And the selectivity, of course, is very low. The current density is, of course, very low. And then the reason is they basically just drop casted the material onto the electrode, and the material forms, various kinds of islands, aggregates on the surface, right? So if we look at this, right, I mean, COPC itself is an insulator, right? So if you want the reaction to take place, for example, at the top surface, right, where the molecule is in contact with the electrolyte, then you need the electrons to go through this insulating COPC material, and this is not desirable, right? So in this case, if you form larger COPC aggregates, only those molecules that are very close to the electrode surface, and meanwhile they are exposed, then the reaction can take place, right? So a more desirable case is you want those COPC molecules or those active sites to be well spread or dispersed on the surface of the conductive electrode, right? Then this reaction can take place more easily, right? So an ideal structure would be, right, you have those individual molecules, they are dispersed on a conductive surface like carbon nanotubes. You get high surface area, you get a good electron conduction, right? So this is the catalyst that we have, right? So in our case, we can get a methanol as a product, right? So at a lower overpotential CO, right? Then you go to more larger overpotential, then CO is going, the selectivity for CO is lower, and then you get a higher selectivity for methanol, right? Of course, if you go to very negative potential, you get HER. Right? Then we kind of see that, the methanol is produced at the expense of CO, right? So it's reasonable to say that the CO is actually a intermediate in this reaction, and then if we feed the CO along into the system, right, we found the catalyst can also reduce the CO, and the methanol in this case now is the only CO reduction product. So this is the process that CO2 is reduced to CO first, and then it's reduced to methanol. right? And then these two reactions that basically takes place on the same catalytic site. So we call this domino catalysis, right? So this is what our catalyst can deliver, right? Efficiency, selectivity 44%. Current, this is a 11. That's I guess a methanol formation current, right? So that's 11 milliamp per square centimeter, and then I guess this is also limited by CO2 diffusion. Right? If we use a gas diffusion electrode, this can be a few times higher, if not 10 times. Right? Then, if we just do a simple mixture of this COPC and the carbon nanotube, right? I mean, this is basically, a similar version of what they used in the 1984 study, right? So we get to a much lower efficiency, much lower current density, right? But the methanol could still be formed, right? So that is basically to say the capability of reducing CO2 to methanol is, at least that's what we believe, right? I mean, that's the intrinsic activity, that's the intrinsic property of the molecule. The molecule can catalyze CO2 reduction to methanol. Then, the dispersion of it on carbon nanotube surface basically make you have a larger number of active sites, and you have faster electron transport to make this reaction to take place more easily. So in the same year, there was a independent study from Mark Robel's group, and they essentially also did a physical mixture of COPC and carbon nanotubes. So it was again low efficiency and a low current, but they again confirmed that COPC does have the activity to catalyze CO2 reduction to methanol, right? So in our study, we further found that while the COPC can catalyze CO2 reduction to methanol, it deactivates, right? So first hour selectivity 44%. After that, decreased by 50%. Then after 5 hours, the activity is almost to zero. And then we look at the UV-vis of the catalyst afterwards. There are peaks that are corresponding to reduced form of this COPC molecule. These ones, right? That's on. Then we thought that it was the reduction that made this deactivation, right? So what we did was we again did some modification with the molecular structure. So now this time we put on 4 electron donating groups, right? And in this case 4 amino groups, and then they did shift the redox features to more positive electrode potential. And then with that one, the catalyst structure is stable after, I guess this is 12 hours of electrolysis. We did not see any peaks corresponding to reduced form of the molecule. And then the production of methanol was reasonably stable. I mean, this catalyst is not as active as the non-substituted COPC form, but it's actually quite stable over 12 hours. Right? So that was the stability issue, right? So that was that work was done, and that paper was published. And then at that time, I got an email from I think from a Yale alumnus, and then he was essentially saying, okay, this is nice work, and then but we are facing some different issues here, and there's some, I guess, water pollution, I guess, right? And then that was related to a high level of nitrates, and then have you looked into whether your catalyst can do this kind of reactions, right? And then I immediately replied yes, because at that point, I think that the reaction was already in my mind, since I have some colleagues, and they work on nitrogen-related stuff, and we have been talking about the reactions related to the nitrogen cycle for a while. So that the nitrogen reduction, and then of course for us it would be electrochemical, right? Because we have been doing electrochemical reactions all the time, and then so that was one that I wanted to do anyway. But I guess I didn't really tell my student, and until my student just somehow did it, right? And then he did it, and then he came back to me that saying, now this catalyst can also electrochemically reduce nitrate to ammonia, right? And then you get H2. Then for the nitrogen reduction, I think ammonia is the dominant product. Right? Get a little bit of nitrite, get a little bit of hydroxyl, and then this is kind of like the pathway that we were thinking of, right? So I saw it was able to reduce nitrate. It was pretty nice. So my first response was, is this new, right? I mean, then I guess it was a little bit disappointing to me because he immediately said no, right? Because I think back in the maybe 1980s or 1990s, people have already reported that COPC can catalyze the electrical reduction of nitrogen to ammonia. And I think this is the a reaction pathway that they were thinking of at that time. So that was not new anymore, right? So I was thinking of some other ideas, right? So I did come up with a new idea at that time, and then as you can see, I didn't write it down here because it wasn't welcomed by my students. So that idea, at that point, I thought it was pretty nice, and then at this time, I'm still thinking it's pretty nice, but it wasn't liked by the students, and now I guess it has been almost 2 years, and then no one in my group is interested in taking on this idea. So I guess it's not a really good one, but I had an idea at that point, right? Okay, so then I also had another idea, right? And I should say that this idea was actually quite reasonable, and then if like one follows on the path, there's going to be something that's quite interesting, and it's for sure it's going to come. I would say. Then I also had another idea that was a little bit risky at that point, right? And then so the second idea was to just do the nitrate reduction, right, together with CO2 reduction, and then to see what happens, right? So that idea was very quickly taken by my student, and then he did the experiment overnight, and then next day he came to me that looks like we are making something, and then it's likely methylamine, right? So then that was a hit, and then then we did NMR. So this is hydrogen, this is carbon 13. It's at the right place, and then it was, I guess, derived by this anhydride, and then it was characterized by mass spec. So we kind of confirmed that this is indeed the product. So now we kind of have a new reaction, and this is quite exciting. So all the energy was basically absorbed by this one, and then the previous idea was completely forgotten, right, at that time. Oh, and by the way, we also did some, isotope labeling experiments to really confirm that the carbon comes from CO2, nitrogen comes from nitrate. I mean, some reviewers, right, of the paper kept asking for this, and then, of course, my response was I kept pushing back because, there were other experiments that we had done at that time, and then they were adequate to basically prove where the carbon comes from and where the nitrogen comes from, right? Then at the end, the editor says, why don't you just go ahead and do this, right? So we finally did that, right? And then resources are wasted, but the paper was accepted, right? So this is isotope labeling results, right? And then we were pretty happy about this reaction, right? Because this is a new carbon nitrogen coupling reaction, electrochemical, right? So there are some precedents there, right? So this one, right, in the 1990s, right, they do CO2 reduction in the presence of nitrate or nitrite or even N2. I mean, this can be done, right? And then I mean, I would not really call this a CO2 reduction because the oxidation state in urea is exactly the same as in CO2, right? But this is a same coupling reaction for sure, right? And then the product is urea, right? Then more recently, right? Von Zhao's group at Delaware, right? They did a very nice work, CO2 reduction in the presence of ammonia. Then the ammonia was able to couple with the C2 intermediate, and then you get a acid amide, right? So in these cases, amides are the products, right? And then this one that we discovered, right? It was the first one that was able to take a CO2 and the nitrate electrochemically to give you alkylamine products, right? And then we happen to realize that the alkylamines are really useful things, right? I mean, they can be used in the pharmaceutical industry, or they can be used as agrochemicals, right? So they are, and we were pretty happy about that reaction, right? So now the next step is to basically figure out, what's really going on in that reaction pathway, right? And then the key is, I guess, where the carbon intermediate couples with the nitrogen intermediate, right? So this is the CO2 reduction to methanol, so we know what happens, right? And this is natural reduction to ammonia, so it's also kind of known, what's going on there, right? So the question is, where do the carbon couple to the nitrogen, right? So obviously, right? I mean, the products are not going to react because this is room temperature, 1 atm condition, and this reaction is not going to be easy to form methylamine, right? So this was basically excluded at the beginning, right? Then this was actually my best guess at that point, right? Because formaldehyde is the intermediate in that CO2 reduction pathway that is most reactive, right? And then it looks quite reasonable that ammonia can attack this, right? Nucleophilic attack, and then you get to something, right? So that was the hypothesis, and then we tried it, right? So we did a co-reduction of CO2 and the CO, and in the presence of ammonia, right? And then we were thinking maybe there's ammonia concentration is not high, so we increased the concentration, and then maybe it's protonated. So we also did the experiment at basic pH, but none of these reactions none of these reactions give methylamine as a product, right? So looks like this isn't the right way, right? But another thing that popped up at the moment is maybe it is still ammonia, right? But somehow the ammonia that is in situ generated on the catalyst surface from the reduction of nitrate may be somehow different from the ammonia that is directly fed into the system, right? I mean, maybe, the in situ generation is getting a higher local concentration and making it more reactive because it's absorbed on the surface or something like that. And that makes it to be reactive to this formaldehyde and then give this coupling, right? So this possibility is still sort of like another 100% excluded because of the existence of, this kind of, somehow, magic explanation. So, then, there are also other issues, right? I mean, if we looked at the NMR carefully of the product, right? So this is methanol, and this is methylamine, and then, there's one peak that is at 2.7, that is unknown, right? Then there's also a pair of doublets here in the lower field, right? I mean, this looks like, hydrogens on double bonds, and it looks like they are splitting each other, right? But we have no idea, at that point, what this is, right? So this is another thing that perhaps we need to figure out, and then we will probably know better about the reaction pattern, right? So we were guessing, I guess, what this could be at that point, right? And my closest guess at that point was this imine is the one, right? Because it's a double bond, right? And then this is a reaction product between formaldehyde and then ammonia, right? And then, because of this H2 hydrogen atoms, there's like a cis trans type of configuration, right? So they are two different environments and they will split each other, right? So I was pretty happy about that guess. And then, I think my student, he simulated an MR in ChemDraw, and then he came back and tell me that, this isn't going to be correct because the splitting between these two is too large for this molecule, right? So we kind of gave up on that one. Then, I had no idea, and I sent my students to Bob Crabtree, right? So Bob is often my go-to person when I need new ideas. And Bob is so smart. He's not correct every time, but every time I talk to him, I come back with experiments and a reasonable idea that I can try out right away. So I sent my student to Bob, and then Bob came up with this one, right? And then of course, the initial response was, how was this one formed in the reaction, right? But at that point, I think our consensus was, let's first verify whether this is the one, and then we think about how it is formed, right? So that was, I think, March 2020. And then, as you all know, right, at that point, we want to do something, and then the lab is 100% closed, right? So there was nothing that we can do. Then I think it went to April, and then one day I was chatting with my collaborator, Hailiang Wang, right? I was asking him what's going on there, and he was like, everything is under control, and the students are ready to come back to lab. So I asked him, now I have an interesting project, and can you ask two of your students to work on that, right? I mean, that was actually quite a reasonable, a request, because we are very close collaborators, and then the catalyst that we use for this reaction originally comes from his lab anyway, right? So he immediately said yes, and then the research was able to continue in the form of a collaboration, right? Then, the second day, the student was assigned, one of his students was assigned to the project. He found something interesting, and he told us that this might be, these two peaks might belong to this compound, and this is a former aldoxine, right? And then he found a paper that was like maybe in the 80s or maybe even in the 60s, and then, somehow the patterns and then the chemical shifts, they match very well with this compound, right? And then so obviously this is a reaction product between formaldehyde and hydroxylamine, right? Then Yongye was telling me at that point that, yeah, I know this kind of reaction. I mean, the reaction between aldehyde and hydroxylamines are really spontaneous. I used to functionalize my polymers with this reaction, and these reactions are like a click reactions. Right? And then everything started to click in my mind. And then I realized that this one was the initial scene coupling product. And then this peak at a 2.7, right, should be this one. This is a 2-electron reduction of this oxime, right? And then this can be further reduced to form methylamine, because I have seen that the reaction happen in some studies of nitromethane electrochemical reduction, right? So now sort of like all the things are coming together, and it answered my question, right? We do not really need something magic in order for this intermediates to couple, right? You cannot rely on intermediate to be magically active or highly concentrated at the electrical surface. If we do want the two intermediates to couple, these two intermediates need to be very reactive, and the reaction is favorable and quick enough, then the coupling can happen, then you lead to new products, right? So that was the I guess, at least for me, the happiest moment in this entire project, right? And then all the things that follow up are pretty natural, and it wasn't so exciting. So then we took all the data, potential dependence of product distribution, stability, right? And then multiple potentials, and repeated it multiple times to make sure that this is repeatable, right? And then we did all those controls, right? So basically, all those things, I guess, beyond the point of formaldehyde, right? They can give the methylamine, and all those nitrogen intermediates that before the formation of hydroxylamine, they can give this methylamine. So essentially, the coupling takes place at the formaldehyde and hydroxylamine state. Right? And if then once you form this coupled products, they can be further reduced to give methylamine. So eventually, it leads to this reaction pathway, right? And then we also tested this condensation reactions, and indeed, it's very fast and thermodynamically favorable, right? So this is pretty much the end of the project, right? Now, if you look at data, right? I mean, I would say this system, I mean, of course, it has its exciting things, right? Say, this is the first reaction goes from CO2 and nitrogen to alkylamines, and it's a cascade process, right? I mean, 14 electron, 15 proton, right? I mean, one pot reaction, right? So it was pretty neat, right? But it is also a little bit messy, right? I mean, in terms of that, if you look at this reaction from a synthesis perspective, right? I mean, the final product, right, is only formed with a Faradic efficiency of 15% or so, right? I mean, and then everything along this pathway is found in the final product, except for some of these ones, but most of them are found, right? So this is actually pretty messy system, right? If you look at it from that perspective, right? But on the other hand, I also think this is a very clean system, right? Because everything that we have seen in the system is on this mapped out reaction pathway, and then there is nothing that is outside this pathway, right? So from a point of inorganic chemistry, I think it's a very neat system, because the reaction pathway is very, very clear. Right? Then we kind of did a story on the Yale News. I guess the main purpose was in case that the original alumnus is still interested, and he could see that we have done something on that regard. Then I guess inevitably, I think this story looks a little bit too promising, and then I think a couple of days after that, I got an email from, I think the city water council or city water committee or something, right? And they were telling me that it is a mistake that the current city plan of water treatment that does not include my technology. So I wasn't really sure that how I should respond to that one, right? But you know, maybe this reaction could have some potential, right? So, and then you know, then a follow-up work, right? This is basically to test that you know the knowledge there is I guess correct and then expandable, right? So we switched to another catalyst, right? Copper, and then the reason is copper can reduce, as you know, CO2 to ethanol, right? And then the intermediate that is before this ethanol is acetaldehyde, right? And if formaldehyde can couple with hydroxyamine, right? So should this acetaldehyde, right? And copper, by the way, is also able to reduce nitrate to ammonia, right? Hydroxyamine is not formed as a final product, but it is an intermediate. Right? So we did that, right? I mean, then, you know, these two can couple and then you get to basically this acetaldehyde and then finally ethylamine, right? So this can be done as well. So I guess with that, I would be able to conclude the talk as it's about time. Right? So, you know, heterogenized molecular catalyst, they can do some known chemistry and then they can do some new chemistry, I guess. And, you know, then new reactions can be enabled if we control the reactive, if we control the coupling of these reactive intermediates, right? Then, you know, mechanism-based molecular structure tailoring is a powerful tool in terms of getting these, you know, reactivity or improved performance. And this is group, and I highlighted my PhD student Yusen Wu. I mean, he basically did all of the work that I just talked about, and then now he's a postdoc at Caltech with the solar group over there, right? So Lisa, right? And then my collaborators on this project, right? Professor Hailiang and his two students, John Dan and Zhao Lin. And this is primarily supported by the catalysis, chemical catalysis program from NSF. And so that is the end of it, and I would be very happy to take any questions.
Oh, all right, great talk. So before we move into Q&A session, I think for our webinar, we have a breakout room before that. So this breakout room, we will separate people into different small Zoom room for you to freely chat with each other to talk about anything you heard, feedback from the talk, and then the software will directly take you back to the main room, and then we can start our Q&A session. That won't take long, just a few minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. So please come back to the main room after that session. All right, I think at least we have more than 2/3 of people coming back. I think we can start our Q&A session. So students, please ask your question first.
I'll go first.
Okay, I was going to say, if nobody goes, I'm going to call on people.
So you mentioned that you were going back and forth with reviewers before doing the isotopic labeling experiments. I was wondering, what was the most convincing piece of evidence that the nitrogen was coming from the gas source and the carbon was from the CO2 before doing the isotopic labeling?
Well, I mean, that's a good one, right? I guess it's not a I think it's not a single piece of experiment, right? I mean, it's I guess, you know, multiple experiments, but I guess one of the convincing ones is those controls, right? So when you switch the CO2 out to argon, you do not get that, right? And then, you know, in the case of nitrate, if we switch out, if we leave it out, or if you put in say ammonia or something like that, right? So if you compare the result with and without nitrate, right, then you get that methylamine product, and then that means nitrate is a difference, right? I mean, if there is impurities in the system, from any other component, right, then you should be able to get the same amount without the nitrate, right? And then these things often happen, right, when the actual production rate of the product is very low, and then we from time to time experience these kind of issues when the reaction rate, especially now when we are doing photochemical reactions, when the reaction rate is say 100 times lower than that, this is usually a issue when you get all kinds of impurities and contaminants come into play, and this basically complicates it. But for a reaction like that, you have a very high partial current, and then you're able to operate for a few hours, and then you get to the millimolar range of concentrations. Usually it's very reliable, and then you can do those argon controls or without nitrate controls to make sure that there's no other things coming into it.
Okay, so they primarily wanted you to do the isotopic labelings because of all the potential for like impurities to be introduced.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a certain point, I appreciate the idea, right? Because I think one of the reviewers said this was the only positive way of confirming that the carbon does come from CO2 and the nitrogen comes from nitrogen, and I think that is well said, right? I mean, the control that we did was sort of like negative controls, right? So I think that is correct. But on the other hand, I guess I wasn't a big fan of sort of like doing multiple experiments to verify the same thing. Once it's verified, it is. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. May I ask?
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering the stability of this so-called molecular CO2 reduction catalyst. So CO2 reduction is kind of like evolution reaction because you have CO coming out, right? And you also have some like methanol or methane, these products. And if you apply this molecule on the substrate, I'm just wondering how it's just only by pipette stacking how the stability is of this catalyst.
Oh, yeah. So you're talking about whether the molecules will come off the surface of carbon nanotubes, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because the chemical structure is stable, right? I mean, methanol or CO, they are not going to do anything chemically to change the structure. So the issue might be that there may be some stripping off, effects taking place there. But somehow, the interaction between the molecule and the carbon nanotube is very strong, and then methanol is not able to make it come off. If you think about how these, I guess I didn't go into the details, but when we put those molecules onto the carbon nanotubes, right? We first dissolve these molecules into DMF, and DMF is the only common solvent that can sort of like dissolve at least some of these molecules. So you go into a solution. So it's a good solvent, and then we do the assembly in the good solvent, and then we wash away all those ones that can come off easily. So these ones that are left on the surface, they are very stable even if you use a very strong solvent like a DMF. Then methanol is not a good solvent, so it's not going to be as powerful as DMF to get those molecules off the surface. So shouldn't be able to get it off the surface of carbon nanotubes. And I guess another thing is these molecules are not very soluble, right, in aqueous solution. So even and I mean, I guess even if they do fall off, right, they won't go into the solution. But maybe if they are reduced, they may be soluble, right? But in any sense, we do not see the color change or anything. So it looks like they are quite stable.
Oh, I see. Thank you, Han. Just because I think that if the current density goes higher, and you will see some bubbles usually.
Yeah, I mean that part I think it's possible that the carbon nanotube and the molecule, they will be stripped off together off the electrical surface. That might be possible.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for the answer.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Oh, go
Hi,
ahead.
Sorry.
Professor Wang. I have one question. I mean, at some point you just mentioned that your catalyst efficiency decreased by 50% after an hour because you thought that the ligand get reduced, right? And then you make a complex system to keep it stable, and then still the efficiency didn't reach to 44%, right? For methanol production. So my question is, I mean, like, instead of making this thing complex, why don't you give like a positive potential pulse after each hour to make the ligand oxidize again?
Yeah, I think that's a that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I guess I was trying to recall what we did. I think we tried out the idea of somehow reoxidizing the reduced COPC, and I'm not sure if we exactly tried the one that you mentioned, you know, to treat it at a higher, you know, at a more positive electrical potential. I think we tried to let it sit in air and then see if it would be oxidized, and then I guess we retested the electrode or something, and then, you know, that wasn't very effective. And then so I would I mean, I'm not sure if we actually did that experiment, but you know, I mean, I needed to ask my student. But I think, you know, the positive, applying a positive potential is not enough to recover the structure. That's my guess. Since, you know, we tried to use air to reoxidize it, and it did not seem to go back. But I agree with you that you know, the amine solution, right? I mean, the amine solution somehow makes it stable, but it does compromise the selectivity a bit, right? From 40-something% to lower than 30%, roughly 30%. So if you could have another way of stabilizing this molecule, then, you know, it would be more desirable.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess, you know, we are not really sure, you know, what is the deactivated form. I think it's clear that it is caused by some detrimental reduction, but it was not clear to us whether it's on the ligand or whether it's on something else. You know, I mean, if you look at the data, right? I mean, we saw those UV-vis peaks. Then if we use sodium boron hydride to reduce that molecule, we kind of see the same peaks. So it was reduction. But you know, I think we tentatively assigned these features to reduction on the ligand because there was a paper, and then they saw the same features, and then they said it was a reduction on the ligand. But I guess we were never sure that it was the case. But it was some reduction of the structure.
Okay.
Any more questions from students?
I have one question.
Sure.
Oh, thank you so much for a great talk. I was in a breakout room with Jeff, and we were both very interested in knowing what your first idea was that your students didn't really want to try, that was kind of forgotten. You kind of left us hanging at the end, and we were like, what was it? We want to know.
Yeah, I mean, so the idea was, say, I mean, it's not a new idea. So, well, I guess the strategy isn't very new, right? So the idea was in that case, right, when we apply the catalyst, it was able to directly reduce nitrate all the way to ammonia, right? And then that is 8 electron reduction process, right? And then as you see on that reaction pathway, right? I mean, nitrate can be reduced to multiple products. It can be nitrite, right? It can be NO, then it can be hydroxylamine, then it can be, you know, ammonia. And if you think about, say, and then coupling, it's maybe possible to make N2, right? So my idea was to tune the process and the catalyst structure, see whether we can individually access these intermediate redox states. And then I have approaches, right? And I have 2 approaches. One approach is to tune the proton delivery, right? Because this is a, you know, reaction that needs proton, need electrons, right? So if we can regulate the transport of protons from the solution, say to the reactant or to the catalyst surface, we might be able to do that, right? I mean, that reminded me of those papers, I saw from Andy Gorth, right? I mean, where they have those like lipid layers, I cannot remember, but those layers that sort of like regulate the proton transfer to O2 reduction, then you get it to H2O2, then you get it to H2O, etc. Right? So that was one thing, right? I mean, in our case, we could regulate more redox states of the nitrogen, right? So that was one idea, one approach, right? Then the other approach was we could independently vary the rate of electron delivery, right? And that dates back to the finding that we got in the CO2 reduction case, right? So if the electron delivery isn't sufficient, right? It only goes from CO2 to CO. But if we can get more electrons to the active site, if the active site is indeed active for that deep reduction, then the deep reduction can occur. So I mean that was telling us that maybe regulate the electron delivery will also be able to regulate the product's activity. So that was the two approaches that I had in mind, and I thought it was a neat project, and we ought to see something, and but it wasn't really welcomed by, as I said, by the students. Right? So.
Well, thank you. That sounded
Yeah,
very
but thank you for asking.
actually. Of course. Thank you.
Chuan, are faculty now allowed to ask questions?
Maybe can I ask a question first?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, hi, Professor. I have a question about the application of your catalyst for CO2 reduction. Since I think your catalyst really relies on the carbon nanotube as a substrate, I know it's very expensive material. So do you think it's promising for large scale application?
I mean, that's a good one, and I guess I never worried about it. Maybe I put too much focus on the chemistry itself, and then I guess not really thinking too much about it. And I guess another reason is I guess I never bought those carbon nanotubes. I think I got it from someone else, and somehow we had a sufficient amount of carbon nanotubes to use at the beginning, and then maybe it was like 100 grams, maybe it was 200 grams. I cannot remember, but it was a whole lot. And then I guess I never know that how much it cost. But but I think this is the type of carbon nanotube that they are now trying to use it for lithium-ion batteries. So this is a carbon nanotube, but it isn't the most expensive type of carbon nanotubes. It's a multi-wall, right? And then it's made from like a batch, like a flow reactor. So I think with a small plant, I think they can produce like I cannot remember, but the production rate is actually pretty high. They get like a large plant, and then this is a type of carbon nanotube that is supplied to the battery industry in China. So of course carbon nanotubes are still a quite expensive component for lithium-ion batteries, but they are able to afford the use of a bit of that, and then that is this type of carbon nanotube that are used there. So I think it is still expensive, right? But maybe it isn't so terrible if we think about say further commercialization. But there are other barriers, of course, right?
Yeah, thank you.
I think the production cost is, I think they used to say, I cannot remember the number now, but I think it was like yeah, I cannot remember now, but it was like maybe tens of dollars a kilogram or something. It isn't terrible. But maybe that's not true. When they sell it, I think they sell it at a much higher price.
It surely sounds like a better choice than platinum, right? Platinum, you can really make it less expensive, but carbon nanotube sounds like there's a way of scaling it up and lowering the cost.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's perhaps why they see the production cost, right? Because I mean, the catalyst is iron, right? And then the source is certainly carbon, so it's reasonably cheap, right? If you can produce it a lot and at a very high rate.
Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
Hey, that was a great talk. I mean, the last reaction you showed in the last 2 minutes was just, I think, an amazing reaction. You're making a CC bond and a CN bond from CO2 and nitrate. That's pretty cool. Have you thought about applying the chemistry in a different context for like synthesizing like commodity chemicals or pharmaceuticals that contain amines? You know, especially the latter, there's a lot of amines, and I guess in agrochemicals there's also a lot of amines. So I'm wondering if you take like benzoic acid, can you make benzylamine from a benzoic acid and nitrate?
Yeah, I mean that's a good point, and I was really thinking of that, and then I guess to be honest, I would need some guidance on that. But this is a good point. You know, I mean, say the two reactions that we did from CO2, right? I mean, I think it was nice, but you know, it got into some issue that you know the yield is low, and then the reason for that low yield is because if you take all the way from CO2 and then you know all those steps in one stroke, it's just hard to get to high yield. So your point is exactly correct, that you know if we take it from a say carboxylic acid product or a reactant, or even like a aldehyde reactant or an ester, you know, reactant, and then to do this, maybe it's much easier, and then you know we can get a higher conversion for that substrate. And also, I think it would be able to allow us to do it in non-aqueous solutions where the chemistry is more favorable. The coupling in aqueous isn't so great, right? So in this case, I mean, the hydroxylamine is quite good. So if we say in order to do amine coupling to the formaldehyde, then this is not a very easy in aqueous solution, because you know the imine is not very stable and favorable, and we were able to actually drive it with to drive the equilibrium with electrochemical reduction. So in some of the cases, we could still able to do, say, you know, methylation of an amine. I mean, that's actually doable, but the yield is not going to be high because of that reversibility issue. So I guess if we switch to organic solvent, that might be another bonus that we can get out of that. But that would be sort of like going a little bit towards the you know, towards like more organic chemistry side. And then you know, I guess I remember at one point, right, I was throwing ideas like that, and then one of my students was telling me that you know, this way, you know, we are losing our strength because, you know, then, you know, nothing on CO2 is involved, right? And then pretty much it can be any catalyst, and then, you know, we are sort of like going around the core strength, but you know, so, and I guess that makes some sense, right? But you know, on the other hand, you know, if we go to other reactions, I think it would be more exciting in terms of exploring the real uses of this reaction, right? Yeah, so I really appreciate the idea. And then if you don't mind, later on, if you can give me more specific advice, I would be great.
Yeah, I mean, that reaction, like taking a carboxylic acid all the way to a primary amine, you're an organic chemist, that takes a lot of steps and it's not straightforward. And you're doing it with nitrate as the nitrogen source. That's crazy from an organic chemist standpoint, right? So they would use ammonia or ammonium or something like that, and they would take carboxylic acid and make a you know, an anhydride or an acid chloride, and then they'd make the amide, and then they got to reduce the amide. That's not an easy reaction, and so if you could do it straight from the carboxylic acid straight to the amine, I think that, and you showed some functional groups that organic chemists would like and it's compatible with, and I think that they would get excited about it. I'm already excited about it because you can make a CC bond and a CN bond with at the same time, and from CO2 and nitrate. That's pretty cool in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I think carboxylic acid would be nice, and maybe, you know, another advantage of doing this sort of like a one pot reaction is, you know, you can sort of like, you know, avoid the further reduction to alcohol, right? I mean, if you take a carboxylic acid, then it's more likely that it will be directly reduced to alcohol. But if you have the hydroxylamine that to couple the aldehyde intermediate, it might be another nice thing to sort of, yes, steer the reactivity.
That's right.
So Hailiang, I have a follow-up question on what Jin Huang asked earlier. That concerns the strong interaction of your catalyst with carbon nanotube. And that's a really good argument. And with that thought in mind, I'm actually a little surprised when you simply mix a catalyst with carbon nanotube, the yield will be so low, right? So if the interaction is very strong, wouldn't that form, the stable catalyst form that will allow you to get really good reduction? Can you comment on it a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good one. And then the real trick is how you do the mixing, right? I mean, or I guess, well, maybe that's not the way of saying it. I mean, I guess so if we think about the assembly process, right, that we use to make the hybrid catalyst, it's also actually a mixing process, but it's just a sort of like sophisticated, I guess it's a well-controlled process. So number one is you needed to use a solvent that is able to dissolve COPC, right? So in that case, at least the molecules are big. The molecules begin with a individual state or like a dissolved state. Then you can get those onto the carbon nanotubes by pipette stacking. So in those physical mixtures, right? I mean, they all use regular solvents like ethanol, ethylene glycol, these type of things. I mean, the issue is COBO-PC doesn't really dissolve in those solvents at all, and then they remain as larger particles like micron sizes, and then it's never a good mixing in that sense. So I mean, if we do a good mixing, say in DMF, right, and then you supply lots of power, like you apply a sonication process, and then the molecules will automatically, I guess spontaneously is the word, to go onto the surface. But in most cases of the physical mixture, right? I mean, the physical mixture is we apply the step to. I mean, of course, we know that, right? So we intentionally applied a terrible solvent to create that physical mixture state. But some other groups, they don't, right? They thought they were using a good solvent, but it wasn't a good one, right? So they ended up with a mixture.
But you really, I think, by providing the details now, I think this is really a place where convergence between organometallic chemists and the material chemists. I think this is where powerful systems can be produced using this system. I'm very excited about the prospect.
Thanks.
So Hailiang, nice talk, and even I just heard your talk last year, but there's very exciting work on that.
You know what? That's because you don't remember not important stuff.
So thanks for that. Yeah, I do remember a lot of things though. So one question for you actually is really about, I just curious about the local environment about at the electro interface, right? You have two cycles and somehow one intermediate hijack the other. And I just want to know that, is this just locally because mass transport is so hindered in the mixture of the nanomaterials, or it's both of them diffuse out and they simultaneously react, especially in the case of methylamine, because after the two intermediates mix together, they need to get further reduced. So to me, I just curious, it's a diffusion out and attack another interactive site, or two things diffusing out together, react or reabsorb and then reduce. So that is
I think that's a good one.
The question. I'm just curious about what is happening really at the microscopic interface.
Yeah, I mean that's a good one. I mean, I can only tell you, what I'm thinking at this moment, right? So one thing I think one thing we noticed was that hydroxylamine does go into the solution phase, and it is detected in the final among the final products, but the formaldehyde does not, right? So that led us to believe that the formaldehyde does not really go into the solution, and I tend to believe that it is still on the active site, and then the hydroxylamine kind of dissolves from the catalyst surface, and then diffuse a bit, and then to attack the formaldehyde. Because if you think about the desorption of that molecule, and then it goes into the solution, then the concentration would be extremely low, and there's no way that this molecule can come back and then react again and have it all consumed, right? So if it does dissolve and then leave the the local area, it's gonna be in the bulk solution, and then you can see it at the end. So that leads me to believe that the formaldehyde does not go off the surface, and then then there are still two pathways, right? So one is the formaldehyde will continue to be reduced on the site, and then if it gets attacked by the hydroxylamine, then it goes to an oxime, and then that can be further reduced to methylamine. So that is the bifurcating point.
Okay.
In my opinion.
So if that's your hypothesis, I guess it's one way you can test or just get an idea about. I'm not sure. Have you tried a different nitrate concentration and then see the reaction order on the generation of methylamine? Because it looks like it's depend on local concentration on ammonia hydroxide, right? And then that will be first order kinetic depend on your nitrate. So if it's a diffusion based on ammonia hydroxide, maybe your ammonia and methylamine generation rate should have a first order kinetic dependent on your nitrate concentration. And if it doesn't, it doesn't mean it's not the end. Well, maybe you have say something like substrate tunneling, that because you're really talking about a microscopic mass transport from one substrate to the other.
Yeah, I mean that's a good one, and that's that's another useful advice that I can get from this group, and then I guess I thought about it, right, and of course, as I'm not really a hardcore organic chemist, and then I guess I'm not very familiar with this type of measurements, right? And but I'm certainly aware of it because I talk to Jume all the time. Then I guess I mentioned these ideas to to my students. I think it is on their list, but I guess it has never gone to the point that they would try to right away. But I think this is a good thing that we will definitely do. I think to look at the reaction order. But I think one of the students, they did do a concentration dependence of the nitrogen source, and in that case, I think it wasn't the hydroxylamine. It was a coupling of CO2 to a I cannot remember what it is, but it's a secondary amine, right? So it's a secondary amine, and it can also couple with formaldehyde. And I think we looked at the concentration dependence. But I think we looked at the effect on the product distribution rather than the actual, the reaction rate, or I guess the reaction order. I think the trend is basically if you have more source, then you effectively change the ratio of the CM products to the methanol product. So you basically get more CM products, and you get much less.
I guess you may want like a partial current density.
Yeah, I think we should
see what's the kinetic rate there. Yeah, and another suggestion is if you really think about local microscopic diffusion, is anything react with the ammonia and hydroxide faster? Just quench it, scavenger to intercept the intermediates before have any chance to reach another active site, if that's your working hypothesis.
To intercept the what?
Well, you are saying ammonia hydroxide is diffusing out microscopically, locally. So if there's a soluble species can react with that much faster than your formaldehyde on your active site, then and to see how fast that quenching will go can tell you whether to validate or prove or disprove there is a soluble ammonia hydroxide intermediates in the proximity of your electrode. It's kind of intercept the intermediates before I had ever chance to form methylamine.
You mean the hydroxylamine intermediate?
Yeah, is it possible maybe I'm making out because I don't know.
Yeah, but it's a stable intermediate. It's relatively stable intermediate. It goes into the solution anyway.
No, that's why I say it's anything can react with that faster. So you put a compound dissolved in solution, and can react with the amine.
You mean before it leaves it, as soon as it leaves the site, it just sort of like intercepted.
Yeah, it kind of scavenged before ever chance to react with formaldehyde, and then you would know whether that is the case or not, right? It's kind of like quenching experiment. I don't know, I'm making it up, but really, really nice talk about this. And
yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, but I guess my knowledge is quite limited, right? I mean, I didn't even know that formaldehyde, the aldehyde can react with hydroxylamine. Then as I read more, and it turned out to be quite well known. Right?
And you need to convince your student to do it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, nice talk. Yeah, really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some more recent studies. I think in our group, we vary the identity of the nitrogen reactant. I think we use the multiple amines, and then we vary the functional group on the amine, and then looks like it depends on the, if it's all amine, then it's dependent on the what is the word, the nuclear philicity of the amine. Right? If it's more nucleophilic, then the CN coupling yield is higher. Then hydroxylamine and then hydrazine, these are different, even though that they are not so nucleophilic as amines, alkylamines, but they have a faster reaction rate to couple with formaldehyde because of that. I think what is the term? The p-pi conjugation thing. Okay. That makes it more stable.
Yeah. And I have another follow-up question actually. When Jeff started doing the reaction organic solvent, I just curious about, is this kind, because the reason you can solve the PC on the porphyrin, on the nanotube is by hydrophobic interaction. If you change the organic solvent, is that hybrid still stable? Have you tested about, say, what kind of solvent that kind of hybrid remain their strong interaction?
Yeah, I mean that is a thing to consider, right? I mean, if the solvent is pretty good for the molecule, then it might be able to, it might not be as good. But but the COPC does not really go into regular solvents so easily. So yeah, maybe it's okay. But another thing is, if we go to a different reaction, then this COPC is not really needed, because the reason that it has to be there now is because it's the only one that can do CO2 to formaldehyde, right? I mean, the nitrogen reduction reaction is easy. And I mean, it does not take place on everything, but it takes place on lots of things, right? So nitrogen reduction to ammonia is straightforward, and then the hydroxylamine is kind of there as an intermediate. So if we do not do the CO2, then maybe we can use other electrodes as well. It doesn't have to be the COPC anymore.
My take on that is you may be careful about it, because I thought in your working hypothesis you're proposing, I thought you're alluding at least that nitrogen activation, nitrate reduction happen on the PC as well. But now you're trying to say that carbon nanotube could be active towards nitrate reduction too. Is that what you're trying? Or I just trying to see where nitrate.
Yeah, I mean, you get a good point there, and I guess and I think that's a good one, right? And then so now I'm going to tell you some secret, right? So I think.
All right, yeah.
I mean, the carbon nanotubes are pretty active for nitrate reduction to ammonia.
Yeah,
and I'm not very sure that how active it is. Well, at least I think it's comparable. And then some of my students, right? So talk about my students. So some of my students, they believe that it is not a COPC, it is a carbon nanotube.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's not a hard.
And then
you have a little bit nickel impurity in your nanotube too, right?
No, there's no nickel.
Oh, you leach it out? Okay.
Well, and then now I'm going to tell you another secret. Right? So looks like the pristine carbon surface is more active for nitrogen reduction. If you functionalize it, then it's worse.
That's kind of weird. I didn't expect that. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna figure something out over there, but that's what's taking place over there. So speaking of that, right? So it was actually kind of nice, when we wrote the paper. And of course, in our mind at that time, we were thinking really it was the COPG that are doing the nitrogen reduction, and that was because we saw a paper back at a few decades ago saying that, right? Then I guess somehow the wording there is still it is reduced on the COPC CNT catalyst, right? So even if it is a CNT, it is that catalyst. So
yeah, that's why from what you describe it, I feel a little bit different, right? So that's I wonder what do you think? Yeah. All right, never mind. Wonderful. Thanks for turning this.
Yeah, but it doesn't hurt the process. You know what, right? Even if it's on the carbon nanotube, then it is again a two-sided process. It has to go off one side and then go to another side. Right? This is still the situation over there.
One way you can try is changing the loading density of your PC, because you can think about if it's a really that carbon nanotube contributing nitrogen reduction, changing the PC loading amount will not changing the rate of nitrogen reduction, and all the CO2 reduction sites are surrounded by amine hydroxide intermediates. So so this kind of dependence can tell you what is the role, who is contributing more in the mechanistic study.
Oh yeah, man, that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe that could help the conversion rate of the carbon CO2 reduction intermediate, right?
Yeah. So I should shut up because I'm asking too many already. Yeah.
So following up Professor Liu's comment, I have one question: that why the carbon nanotubes you are using? I mean, why not the other substrate? What is the speciality of the carbon nanotubes?
Yeah, I think that's a good one, right? That's a good one. And I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I have enough data to comment on that, right? But the carbon nanotube is important in a couple of aspects. So first of all, you needed it to be pure enough, right? Meaning that it needs to be free of metal impurities and then functional groups, because if you have the carbon nanotubes being active for HER, then it's going to be an issue, right? I mean, this CO2 reaction to methanol has a very large over potential. I think it's 0.9 volt or like 1 volt, right? So if in that case, on that condition, you get lots of HER catalyzed by the carbon nanotube, then it's going to lower your selectivity. So that is one thing. You can't have a impure carbon nanotube. Then on the other hand,
but you do need like active hydrogen for methanol formation as well. So you may turn this issue into for your good. I mean, like if you produce very little hydrogen on top of electrode surface, and you are having like CO production on cobalt PC, then you may get the more methanol efficiency indeed, because active hydrogen can also play a role in methanol formation, right?
I mean, yeah, I mean that is another good point that I almost never understand, right? Because both the reactions they would need a hydrogen, right? I mean even CO2, right? I mean you said CO2. The active form of hydrogen, right? So I mean that's a different story, right? If you think about say you get a hydrogen atom, right, on the carbon nanotube surface, and then it gets spilled over to the cobalt side and it hydrogenates the CO2 or the CO. I mean, certainly that is a very desirable process, right? But what I'm talking about is HER, so that's the formation of H2, right? So if the carbon nanotube itself is favoring H2, then it's gonna cause trouble.
I see.
Right. Well, and then another aspect is you need a reasonably good graphitic surface to anchor those molecules, right? So we at a certain point tried, I think, a single wall carbon nanotubes, right? And then then they are not as good. I mean, on one side they are more active for HER because those single walls they contain more metals, and then they are not very good for assembly because they are kind of small, and then they bundle a lot, and it's not loading lots of COPC molecules onto it. Methanol can still be formed, but not to the same level of selectivity. So the type of carbon nanotube doesn't matter as well.
I see. But it is like very complex and very interesting topic, I think, the CO2 reduction specifically, because it involves a lot of intermediates.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is true, right? I mean, it's quite complicated. And then another thing we were actually thinking of, and we are doing something on it is, the CO intermediate between the CO2 and the methanol, and then whether it actually comes off and then goes back again, whether it's actually being reduced and it never comes off, and it's related to where the rate limiting barrier for that process is. And, then there's a local CO environment, that type of thing.
I see.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated in the reaction pathway, and then the intermediates, etc., because there's so many intermediates. But I think it's also quite complicated in terms of the material structure, right? And since we do have multiple components there, I mean, it's not as simple as a small molecule dissolved in solution. Now it's a heterogeneous surface, and it has a molecule, and it has a support, everything.
All right, very fruitful discussion. So I think that concludes our today's webinar. So let's welcome Professor Hailiang Wang again. Thanks for his wonderful talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Hailiang. Yeah.